Hello YouTube, welcome back. This is a late video, and I wasn't really even gonna make a video about it, but I noticed that like when I searched up the Sealy challenge on YouTube, I found like maybe one video about it, which is surprising to me because I feel like I've seen so many tweets about it, and I don't know, I've seen like a lot of like reading challenges going on YouTube lately, so I was like, I'm gonna make that video. We're gonna bring the Sealy challenge to YouTube. So Nicole Sealy is a writer based in Brooklyn who started the Sealy challenge. If you go to her Twitter, which I'll link down below, she's written about what the Sealy challenge is. Basically, for the month of August, you read a poetry chapbook or full-length collection every day for all 31 days of August. And I think it's really cool because I feel like there's not really that active of a poetry community on YouTube. A lot of the poetry videos I've seen, I guess mostly coming out of BookTube, have just been like, what are some like easily digestible poetry books? And then they'll link to like Milk and Honey, and I'm like, okay, I guess that's a start, but and yeah, they'll branch out a bit. They'll talk about Savannah Brown's Graffiti, but yeah, it's kind of, I just keep seeing the same recommendations over and over again, and I've been collecting some poetry books over the past year basically, and I keep meaning to like read them and like get into poetry more, but that just hasn't happened. So this is a great opportunity for me to finally get into these poetry books, and I feel like it's also a great opportunity to bring poetry to YouTube and make it more normalized. I don't know, and I don't want to like minimize the efforts that other creators have done to bring poetry to YouTube as well. I just haven't really noticed that it's as big of a thing as like YA fiction, for example, which deserves the attention it's getting. It's just been most of my experience on BookTube so far. So I don't know if y'all have really noticed my bookshelf back here, but it's kind of like semi-organized in that there's like no organization at all except for this pile, which is all poetry. The other parts of the shelves are just whatever colors kind of look good together. I don't know. But yeah, so this is all of the poetry that I've been meaning to read. Oh my god. Okay, should we do a thumbnail shot? I don't even know if I can hold all of this. Alright, there we go. So yeah, these are all the poetry books that I have been collecting. Actually, it hasn't even been over the past year. Some of these I've had since high school actually, so it's been a long time coming. Basically, okay, I don't know if this counts or not. Some of them I've read already technically, but I feel like with poetry, every single time you read it, you like get something new from it. And I feel like the first few times I read them, I didn't like give them my all, so I'm really excited to get to read them again. This is also not my exhaustive list for the month. I'm still working on obtaining some more books from the library or as ebooks, but I did want to go through kind of a preliminary list of the books that I'm planning on reading for like the first half of the month. How many books is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The first third of the month. Alright, so where should I start? I'll just start at the top of the pile. So this is Rail by Kai Carlson Wee, and he was actually my professor a few years back and sent me this copy, which he signed, which was really, really kind of him, and I'm so thankful because I've been meaning to read this book for years now. I think he launched it like a couple quarters after I took the poetry class with him, and I read some of these poems before, but not in this book because he like very recently sent this to me. So yeah, it was either like online or in class. We also like begged him to share some of his work at the end. So I remember Sunshine Liquidators, as you can probably tell from the title of this book, Rail, and also from what I'm reading on the back of this book. These poems are all centered around what the synopsis describes as the stark landscapes of the American West, and he does this through the lens of trains set against a landscape of rail yards, hopping trains through dusty prairie towns. The last sentence, part cowboy poet, part prophet, Carlson Wee finds beauty in the grit and kinship among strangers along the road. So yeah, I'm really excited to read this. I just took an intro poetry class with Kai, but Kai also does this class at Stanford called the Great American Road Trip, I believe, where they study a bunch of writing about traveling and then go on an actual road trip up and down California. And I'm so sad I didn't get to take that class, and now it's too late. But alas, this is the first book that, well, I don't know if I'm gonna read them in this order. All right, up next is Monica Socks, A Nail the Evening Hangs On. This book I picked up in, I want to say February. A couple of my friends and I drove out to Oakland to go to her book launch, which was super awesome. And I still have this like promotional card from it that I just wedge in the book. I also got her to sign it for me too. She was so sweet. She like connects all the words and writes your name in it. I have not read this book fully, but she did read a few poems to us at the launch, and I have also read like a few poems since, but I'm really excited to finally read this fully. A lot of the poems in this book are about her family's memory of the Khmer Rouge regime. The description on Goodreads says, driven by myth-making and fables, the poems examine the inheritance of the genocide and the profound struggles of searing grief and PTSD. Though the landscape of Cambodia is always present, it is the liminal space, the in-betweenness of diaspora, in which younger generations must reconcile their history and create new rituals. I think it's super important to read about these histories that are often glazed over in our history textbooks in school and even at the college level. Like, at least in the classes I've taken, we've never really talked comprehensively about Southeast Asian history. Like, maybe we've touched a little bit on US imperialism, but I feel like history is often portrayed as like, this is what happened and this is factual. And I feel like we'd benefit a lot from discussing it from more artistic viewpoints. And it's such an important medium for people working through trauma, and especially intergenerational trauma. And it makes connections that a lot of us might not just come to on our own. So I am super duper ready to get into this as soon as possible. Alright, so next up is A Timeshare by Margaret Ross. This book I've had for a long time. Margaret has also signed it for me. Oh my god, is this just like me showing off all the books I've gotten signed? Okay, there's definitely some books in here that I don't have a personal connection to, but Margaret was also my poetry professor. This was sophomore year, I believe. And so junior year, she was doing a reading, so I asked her to sign my book. And okay, as you can see by the bookmark, when I read it last summer, I did almost finish it. Her poetry is so cool lyrically, and like I love the way she plays with language, but I honestly had kind of a hard time understanding everything the first time around, so that is why I want to reread it this month. If I remember correctly, this book is very concerned with time, as the title would suggest, and the ways that like corporate America are kind of tied into that. Oh my god, did I say timed into that? Attending one of Margaret's readings is always a really cool experience, and she also read for us in class at the end too, but she memorizes all of her poems, and so she just kind of like recites them to you, and it's such a cool experience. I've never seen anyone read like that before. I think I need to start speeding up, but I'm really excited to get back into this. Okay, next up is Sylvia Plath's Ariel. Oh my god, is the sticker still on here? I got this at Strand. I know, basic. This is by Sylvia Plath. It is a very famous book. This is the restored edition, so there are some like poems that are just printed in like typewriter print, and there's also like versions where she's like put in edits, so that's pretty cool. I read The Bell Jar before. I've also read like a few of her poems before online. Since I bought this at Strand, I actually don't think I've read a single one of the poems in this book, so I'm really excited to read this. I think I've had this since high school. And yeah, it's kind of a lengthier collection, but I'll spend one of these weekends just like working my way through it. All right, next up, Voyage of the Sable Venus by Robin Cost Lewis. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Is it Costy? This video will tell me. Robin Cost Lewis, who is Robin Cost Lewis. This book I've read a few poems out of, but that was like several years ago, and I really want to read it again What is it about, you ask? Okay, so something really cool about this book is that every single poem title, I believe, is after like a visual artwork. And I think it starts in like ancient times and dissects the way that Black women have been represented in art. It's split into a few parts. The first part is just like assorted poems. The second is Voyage of the Sable Venus, which has 8 parts to it, and then the third is like more assorted poems. I think the second part was the one that I read at the time, and I am so excited to get back to it. I might actually read this first. Alright, okay, next up is a really exciting one too. Oh my god, this is The Book of What Remains by Benjamin Alire Saenz, who I think some of you might recognize that name from what's the book called? Aristotle and Dante Discovered the Secrets of the Universe. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, that is one of the most celebrated YA novels of my time, at least. That was like what we were all raving over in like 8th, 9th grade. So I did read that book before I got really into his poetry, but his poetry is so beautiful too. I read this entire book when I got it, but I really want to revisit it now because at the time I read it, I was like pretty young. This book uses language with uncommon passion, lyricism, and urgency to act as the intentional witness in a transitional space, the border between the United States and Mexico. Within his narratives, the desert's austere beauty and the brutality of border politics mirror every person's capacities for generosity and cruelty. Borderland spaces, real and imagined, are constants in these poems, and within them, Saenz directly confronts crises of faith, civil rights, and contemporary politics. Highly recommend. Moving along. Alright, so this book is pretty hyped at this point. It's Maggie Nelson's Bluets. I got this book in high school as well. I think I read the very beginning in the bookstore before I got it, but then I never got back to it. But I remember what I really liked about it was how Nelson writes stylistically. So it's kind of more like prose poetry than what you would think of as verse poetry. It kind of exists in these like paragraph-sized blurbs, and each of them are numbered, and so there's not really any distinct poem titles. It's just continuous throughout the whole book. I don't know if this is simplifying it too much, but if I recall correctly, Bluets is like meditations on the color blue, which makes sense. I'm gonna search it up on Goodreads to see if there's a better way to describe that. Suppose I were to begin by saying that I had fallen in love with the color. A lyrical, philosophical, and often explicit exploration of personal suffering and the limitations of vision and love as refracted through the color blue. Yeah, I mean, this book was really popular back when I bought it, but I haven't heard like too much about it since, until a friend read it spring quarter for a class he was in, and then I was like, oh, I should actually finish that book at some point. So yeah, that is the next book in my pile. And then we have Actual Air by David Berman. This book was one of the first books of poetry I ever purchased. I think it was like 8th or 9th grade. I saw a lot of people raving about it on Goodreads, and I was like, all right, like I'm gonna get it. I think I read like a preview online and just loved his style as well. It's very like humorous in some ways, and actually out of all of these books, I think if you're someone who's not that interested in poetry yet, this is like the book that I would recommend you start out with. I definitely don't mean to imply that it's like not deep or sophisticated. It combines that with such like a playful like self-awareness. Oh my god, I remember reading Self-Portrait at 28 online before I got this book, and I think that was the reason I decided to get it. I fell in love with that poem. It was so good. I really need to reread this. Wait, actually, okay, this is gonna be my number 2 book that I read. I'm so excited. Okay, then we have Falling Awake by Alice Oswald. This book I believe I read sophomore year as well, but I really don't remember that much because I read it for a class, and I feel like it's just so hard, like on the quarter system, like actually sitting down and paying attention to what you're reading and engaging with it on more than a surface level. So I do really want to read this book again. So the reason we read this book in class was because I think this was our nature writing book, and yeah, all the poems are very like interconnected with nature. There's this one really cool part of a poem that actually uses this, like, I don't know if you can see, yeah, that like line on both sides of the page. So it kind of acts like a timeline or like a measurement kind of thing. I don't really remember what the function of that is in the poem. My camera is starting to die, but luckily we are on the last book. This is Crush by Richard Sykin. Very famous book, very critically acclaimed. I picked this book up in an indie bookstore in Colorado while I was visiting last summer, and I just haven't had a chance to read it. I've read one of his most famous poems that I think is in this book. It's called Litany in Which Certain Things Are Crossed Out, and that poem changed my life. I remember my friend Michelle recommended it to me probably in 9th grade as well. This was like right when I was getting like really invested in poetry, and I'm so excited to read the rest of it. Okay, so yeah, those are all the books that I intend to start out with in this Sealy challenge, and I definitely encourage y'all to take a look at some poetry books that you might have lying around the house or at your library, and especially if you consider yourself like someone who's not really into poetry. I feel like poetry has like a bad reputation because when we learned about it in like high school English, it was all this like Shakespeare and like maybe like even more archaic stuff, and I think poetry has changed so much since then. And also, for those of you who are really into poetry already, if you have any new suggestions or books that you're planning on reading for your Sealy challenge, definitely leave them down below. I am trying to clobber together this list as soon as possible because it's already day 3 and I'm gonna run out in 7 more days. Alright, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!